So it is our incredible honor to have Paul Selig with us today, the renowned channeler, playwright, and teacher. So, Paul, how are you doing today?
I'm well, thank you.
Excellent, excellent. So happy to have you on the show here. Um, we are quite literally in the shadow of Harvard Divinity School here. So I try to start each of these shows with the same question, which is, what was your relationship to religion like growing up? All right. Did you have a, strong religious upbringing, a non-religious upbringing? How did that play out for you?
It was a non-religious upbringing. Both of my parents, I assumed that we were just atheists. That's how I assumed our lives. But my father had been a German Jew, and
Mm,
he was part of the Kinder transport. He didn't believe in anything by the time he came to the States. And my mother, who'd been, which I actually didn't know till recently, she had been a practicing Christian when she was young and had a rough encounter with a minister on her 18th birthday, and that
mm,
ended her relationship with all religions. So I grew up without it. I thought it was for other people. I lived in Manhattan. We went to therapy. We didn't really go to
mm.
church or to synagogue.
Oh, just quick follow-up. Do you know what sort of denomination or tradition your mother practiced?
I heard that she passed recently, but
Oh,
an old babysitter of mine wanted to meet her after many, many years, and I arranged the meeting. And this woman sort of interviewed my mother when my mother just sort of poured all this stuff out. So I think she was initially a Catholic. I think she ended
mm,
up being a Protestant. I really don't know because we didn't talk about it. It wasn't something that was discussed in the home at all. And when I got into the work that I do now, nobody quite knew what to make of it, myself included, really.
yeah. That's a really fascinating part of your backstory I hadn't heard before. Okay, so we'll definitely wind there. So, non-religious upbringing,
Yeah.
but people with, as you've clearly shown, sort of spirit abilities later on in life, it's
Mhm.
pretty common for there to be either some sort of experiences that in retrospect, as you're a kid,
Yeah.
show, oh, well, that's pointing me in
Mhm.
this direction.
Oh,
So
yeah.
what were those for you?
Well, the first one, which was the one that I still question, not the validity of it, but what actually happened was when I was about 5 years old, and it was an out-of-body experience where there was a being hovering over the side of my bed, and I was laying on my side, sort of looking at it, and I just knew that it was sort of glowing gold, and there was intricate fabric on whatever it was wearing. And then the next thing I knew, I was floating on the ceiling, looking at myself down in the bed, engaging in this conversation, none of which I heard because I wasn't in my body
Mm,
for it. That was significant. And when I was about 9, I dreamt about walking up this strange stone flight of stairs to this fountain shaped sort of like a Coptic cross that was
mm,
covered in autumn leaves. And Technicolor, I never forgot it. I didn't know the place. And that was Goddard College, where I ended up running a master's program. When I first saw the campus when I was 13, and that blew me away because I saw the steps and I saw the fountain. My
mm.
family was traveling through Vermont at the time. And then when I was about 30, 31, I got a call asking me to interview there, and there was the fountain. And in a lot of ways, that was an important place for me personally and spiritually because my life was taking a very strange turn. And I was having to question everything, but there was something about being, back in this fountain that I had dreamt about when I was 9
Mm.
that gave me a sense that perhaps I was where I was supposed to be. And in fact, I really do look at that time at Goddard as preparatory for what I
Mm.
do now, in many, many ways.
Yeah, I can't wait to dive in there because
Mhm.
one of the things that I really want to explore with you is this relationship between creativity and the channeling.
Uh,
But want to sort of
sure.
get to there through a couple other questions as well. So you ended up teaching in the creative writing program. Do you remember when you first started writing? Like your sort of first piece?
Yeah, in college. I started writing in
Oh.
college, my freshman year. I didn't want to be a writer. I still really don't, and I'm trying to work on a memoir now. But I had the worst writer's block of anybody I've ever known for many, many, many years. And I was, teaching writing at NYU, and I was running a writing program at Goddard, and it's what I did. But I started when I was in college, and I never, when I first began channeling and getting known for this, never really thought of a relationship between my own creative work and the sort of more psychic channel work until actually it was Jeff Kripal who asked me that question. And then it made sense. When I was writing, I was actually inducing trance without knowing that I was. I would put one piece of music on loop for hours, and I would just sit there and write, and that was the initial writing. So I didn't know what a trance was. I didn't know that I was inducing it. And I didn't know how clairsentient I was. My channeling is one thing that I do. The psychic work that I do is a little bit different. I step into people.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not a medium for the dead. I'm not going to hear necessarily your great uncle, but if your uncle's living in, Poughkeepsie and you haven't talked to him for 5 years, I might be able to step into him, start to resemble him and hear. Mm-hmm. So I'm embodying at a certain level with whatever I'm doing. And that was happening in the writing as well without my thinking of it in those terms.
Is that what brought you to write plays?
No, I don't know.
No.
I don't know. I got encouraged. I was
Oh.
encouraged my freshman year. I
Mm-hmm.
think I was dating somebody who said, you should do this. So I said, okay, I just did what I was told.
Yeah.
And, but it was always about voices, really. It was never about narrative and story. That was always my weakness. But I could hear voices, and I could give them a truthful rendering. It's quite different than what channeling is for me. It's a very different process. The channeling isn't an emotional process. The writing was. And it was about becoming other people. I think of myself as a radio,
Yeah.
more than anything else. So when I'm channeling, I'm playing one station, I'm playing a broadcast that's specific, and it does its job. And my job really is to be the spoken stenographer. And I look at it as stenography, really. It's not creative in that kind of way. The psychic work is a little more creative because I'm embodying a bit more. I'm feeling what people are feeling, and I'm having to give language to things that I see or I'm feeling, or interpret a gesture that I may be making, or an expression. That's okay. I'm making an angry face. What's this about? But they're different things. And how that relates to the writing, I don't know. I suppose I was a radio then. I just was playing a pretty low level station,
Yeah.
It wasn't the happy stuff.
Yeah, I was looking through your plays, and it's different than
Yeah,
what
yeah.
it quite different than what eventually came out in channeling. So if you
Mhm.
didn't go to college to be a writer, what did you go to college
I
to do?
did go, no, I did go to college to be a writer. I started writing in college my
Okay.
freshman year. I was going to act, and I hated that.
Mm,
And then I started writing, and then I stayed writing
mm.
through college. And then I went straight out of college to Yale, and I got a master's in playwriting there. Although in retrospect, I was probably drunk for much of my graduate career.
As grad
Um,
students do. Oh.
I did a little better than other people, I have to say. So, um, yeah, so I was writing, and I don't know. I mean, it was about, when I look back at my old writing from those days, I was really always writing about transcendence. I just didn't
Mhm.
know that that was my subject. It was always about people finding this other state of beingness, maybe perhaps through madness
Mm.
or something or other. It wasn't necessarily at all having to do with religion, because religion was for other people.
Mhm.
It wasn't on the menu of what I thought I was allowed. And, I thought it was kind of for stupid people when I was growing up. It wasn't for us.
I can hear how you and Vicky, or Victoria Nelson, who has previously been on
Oh,
the show, would have very much gotten along on that
oh yeah,
front.
yeah.
The Secret Life of Puppets seems to resonate with what you're talking about quite a bit. So you're talking about the way transcendence worked into your plays. This brings me to, soon after you got out of college, or your MFA program,
Mhm.
that's when the Harmonic Convergence was, correct?
Yeah, that was a year later.
Yeah.
I got out of Yale. I was 25. I had a drinking problem and an incipient drug problem. And I looked like I was about to have this stellar career. You know, I was getting produced already in New York and London, and I was getting published. And basically everything crashed down around my head at 25. I mean, I'd never been out of school. I'd worked in bars when I was in college. You know, I had relatively no skill set for the real world.
Mm.
And suddenly I was in New York. And well, basically what happened was I started praying. That's really what happened for the first time in my life. And the first voice I heard told me to get my act together and how to do it. And I listened to the voice, and I actually stopped drinking then. You know, it's been 37 years or something now. And the harmonic convergence came shortly thereafter. And I just heard that there were going to be people waking up. That's what I heard. I said, well, if there is a God, and I was beginning to think maybe there was something like a God, and if you asked to be woken up, why would it want to say no? I mean, I didn't know any better. I just didn't know any better. So yeah, I've had a bit of an experience the night before this cosmic event. Now, like, there's a cosmic event every other Tuesday, it seems like, and I don't pay them much mind. But when I was 25, I really, I was in a state of real, I think, openness to the possibility of something like God, whatever that was. And I welcomed it, and I went up to the roof of the building that I was living in, asking to be woken up, thinking that something could actually happen. And in my case, something did. I'm not going to say it woke me up, but it woke me up out of one thing into another possibility, which has sort of anchored the life that I've lived since then.
Yeah, I mean, I know you've written and spoken about the night of the harmonic convergence many times, and I mean, one, it's exceedingly beautiful, but it's also interesting to hear the way energies come up,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, energies and auras and these things that would eventually start to come out much more fully in the channeled work. But you know, you have this very profound energetic experience, right?
You know, somebody had given me a mantra. Somebody gave me a crystal. I thought you needed the props in those. Yeah,
Yeah.
I thought this is what you need to go wake up. So I was trying
Uh,
to teach myself how to meditate, and the mantra was Sat Nam. I didn't know what it meant, but it turns out it's a Kundalini mantra. And people said it sounded like I had a spontaneous Kundalini awakening. I don't know. I sometimes think maybe I was just hyperventilating, really, all these years later. But it was an experience of energy moving through my body out through the top of my head, and my hands were clawed. And you know, it's a state that I've had a milder version of doing breath work than I had then. There, I just didn't know what the hell was going on. I just knew that it was a palpable experience of something other, and that I had asked for it, and something was actually happening. And I think, given where I had come from, which was a lifetime of skepticism, the idea that I could have an experience of something that was palpable was very helpful and useful. And then there were fruits to the experience. You know, I started seeing little lights around people shortly thereafter, and that was the beginning of this other kind of awareness.
oh. So, and one of the things that I came upon, I was rereading I Am the Word in advance of this, and it just hadn't clicked for me before when I first read it, but it's on like page 211. The guides point out that after that experience, you had like a very sad, dark sort of 2 years, right? And that's really both interesting, important, and humanizing,
Yeah.
right? Because that's what happens after these profound experiences. So if you want to unpack that at all.
Well, I mean, I don't recall it being that time that everything was falling apart at that time, truthfully, you know, for many reasons. I mean, I was newly sober. I was suddenly living in a world where there was this thing like maybe like God, which was just mind blowing to me. My friends thought I was nuts. I was seeing little lights around people. People thought I had a detached retina or a tumor. I was just, you know, I didn't know what the hell was going on. And also, it was, you know, to place it in time, it was the height of the AIDS epidemic in New York, and my friends were dying all around me. And, you know, I had no money. I mean, I was really in a strange, perfect storm that I think allowed for what happened to happen. I think, had I had a stronger mooring in who I was at that time, I might have had a different experience. But I was at a time where so much of everything that I thought was suddenly being challenged. 23-year-old friends of mine were in the hospital. It was a horrible, horrible, horrible time. The experience that I do recall, which was later, a few years later, I had a brief, maybe 2-3 day experience of a heightened awareness that came after a very, very difficult period, where it felt like the pain that I was in was just gone. And I knew, and I was very poor, very, very poor. I knew that I was right where I was supposed to be. I had like 45 cents to my name, and I knew I was fine. I knew everybody was fine. And that lasted for a few days, and then it dissipated, and I felt terribly, terribly sad and betrayed after that, because I thought I had arrived, like there was this payoff to having had such a rough time. But sometimes I think now about those kinds of experiences when they come is that they need to be integrated. We have the big experience, but then people get attached to big experiences.
Yep.
And I think really it's about, well, now how do we integrate this, and does this become part of our life? And in my case, I think it generally always has. But you kind of get to go back, almost strange, I want to say, and earn it, so that it becomes more practical and less exotic, or less, foreign, less trippy.
Yeah.
It
And
just
that's one
becomes
of
part of it. Yeah.
that's one of the wonderful things about your channeled works, is just how direct and practical it is. It's not exotic in that way, right? Which a lot of them are.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, it's also not uncommon for people who have had these sorts of experiences, and not to exoticize, but just to sort of more them in reality a bit. You, especially coming from a skeptical background, try to figure out what the hell happened, right?
Yeah.
Like, you have to go around, you go to workshops, you start to read books. So what were some of the things that entered into your world that made you go, okay, I'm starting to be able to make sense of this in a way that doesn't make me think of detached retinas?
In my late 20s, early 30s, I did read. I kind of stopped, and I really don't read other channeled stuff. When I was a grad student, I read half a Seth book in between, bottles of NyQuil. And I thought that was kind of amazing, but I didn't finish the book. But I actually do think it cracked a window open that had been closed, that book. So I read stuff, and I read, William James, and I read some of the new agey stuff that was coming out around that time, which was useful and interesting. And all of those things really did was give me permission. I never got into deep esoteric occult study. It just wasn't my thing. And I think I was probably a little spooked by it. Emmett Fox, was a New Thought writer. That had a huge effect on me. And that was big in 12-step land. I had a therapist who shoved that book at me. And much of what I feel the guides teach is in some kind of accord, although the guides have now dictated 12 books to me, and I only read the one of his. So there were influences, but I think mostly, more than anything else, I had people show up. I studied with a teacher at a certain point who was teaching healing back at a time when everybody and their brother wasn't teaching healing. I mean, this lady had been one of the first 22 Reiki masters attuned in the US by this woman named Takata. And who was a teacher, who was a protege of Dr. Usai, who brought through Usai Reiki. And she was doing her own thing, and she was formidable. And she spooked me because she was good. I was like scared of this lady, but I wanted to be like her. But I had people who showed up, and I have to say I'm very fortunate. They've always shown up. Because I have to say, I'm not a trained channel. I'm not a trained psychic. I didn't know that I could do anything that I do until I was doing them. And then I had to find some context, or somebody could say, yeah, this is what you're seeing, or this is what this means. And, when I look at somebody and I feel the pain on my right side, it's their left side too. I'm like a mirror, and I go, oh, thank God, that's what that means. Because there's other people that work this way. And I think I was fortunate that I was kind of grounded in recovery stuff still in those early days, because my spirituality, as I first encountered it, was extraordinarily practical. It was a necessity. It wasn't about feeling special or being special. And it's one of my quibbles at times with spiritual stuff, is that, it becomes special. And I think actually it's less special than we think. I just think, we don't know that we have permission to claim what's already ours in some ways.
That's well put. Yeah. So with that, um, so you're studying with the Reiki master. Is that when you started to have the experience of being sort of channel for the living? Is that where that developed out of?
Yeah, and she wasn't teaching Reiki. She had broken from that community, was doing
Oh,
her own
interesting.
stuff,
Mm,
which was the energy of the divine feminine, which now everybody talks about. But again, back then it wasn't discussed. There was this whole Mary component to what she was doing, but she was an old Scotch-Irish lady, and this was her thing. Anyway, I've been trying to write. I've been trying to write about this time in my life myself, and so I've been thinking about her in this time. But yeah, I studied with her. We take weekend here, a weekend there. I kept going. And then I got a call to volunteer at this place called the Manhattan Center in New York, which was providing services for people with life-challenging illness. It was one of the pop-ups that began in the AIDS epidemic to provide alternative services. And I found that when I had my hands on people's bodies, I started to hear things for them, and I started to feel what was going on in my own body, and it was provable, which I liked. I could feel it, and that's how that began. And once I began to trust that I was actually getting some valid information that was of some use to somebody, I started a little group that met in my apartment, and it met there for about 18 years. Very, very under the radar. I wasn't looking to get a career doing this. I wasn't wanting to be known. You had to know somebody to come to the group. But that's where I really began to be developed. And I really do think that I was being developed through that time. It was in some ways a school for me, as well as the people that were there.
Have this describing the mediumship for the living. I understand the empath. That makes sense.
Yeah.
And then, entities, or I know you don't channel deceased persons, but, for some reason that is easier to wrap the brain around. Channeling living persons. That's,
Yeah.
pardon?
It's so much easier. I mean, for me, it's easy. That's the easy
Yeah.
thing. And and what I like about the living is that you can prove it. There's a show that I was on a few years ago called On the Unexplained. It's actually airs on Hulu now. I think you can find it. When I was stepping into this woman's kid, I just met the woman. The camera crew came and she sat in my apartment, and I sat into her. I just stepped into the name of her kid. I use the name as a coordinate. It's like psychometry. And you can see me somatize the kid's cerebral palsy, which I didn't know that he had, and they intercut me with the kid. And I didn't believe that I was really doing things at that level until I saw that, because I just feel it. I feel it. I don't get the confirmation. Unless somebody says, you look just like my uncle, or you're doing this, you don't know what this means. My uncle's a skier. Those are the ski poles. That kind of stuff. It's physical for me. But my feeling about this is that people that still have a body are on one sort of radio station that's easier for me to access. And the guides are at this whole other one. People that are dead are on this other station. Now, I can get them, and I do. But if you ask about your mom and she's crossed, I may step into your mom and I would get her as she was when she was here. And sometimes then I will get them as they are when they're there. The only time, sometimes it's happening and I don't know it. If I'm reading for somebody and I see a guy who's dressed right out of Saturday Night Fever, I've learned to say, did you lose somebody who, wore, a puka bead necklace, and a Kiana shirt? And she said, yeah, that's Frank. He's been gone since 82. I like that. But the difference for me is hearing. I can sometimes see them. I can sometimes resemble them. I can report on things. But the clairaudience, or maybe it's telepathic, but the ability to hear and work with language seems to be much more grounded in people that still have a body. And that includes, which is interesting to me, people in comas, locked-in syndrome, kids that have never spoken, have been nonverbal. That's what happened in that TV episode, because I was hearing this kid and I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know what was wrong. He kept saying, "Get me out of my body. Get me out of here. Get me out of here." I'm thinking, what the hell's going on? Turns out he'd never spoken. That was the first
Oh
utterance.
my.
And it was upsetting. But
Yeah.
I didn't know what was going on. And I lost my hearing during, I said, is he deaf? And the mom is saying, "I don't know." And I'm going, how the hell does she not know? She's got a 13-year-old kid. But she didn't know because the kid didn't have language. So that's easier for me because it's physical, and I just call it stepping in. You're just stepping into somebody else and you become them when you do that. I always have to say it's not psychic spying, because I think we're at levels of conversation on higher levels all the time. We just don't know it.
Mm. Yeah, and this can come up around the channeling too, but it raises so many interesting questions about personhood, right?
Oh, yeah.
So we're having this conversation right now, but ostensibly somebody could be, channeling Matt, right? In a different space, right? So have you
Yeah.
ever, actually, that's an interesting question. Have you reached back to somebody who you channeled for someone else and said, what was your experience like at this time that I was doing the channeling? Did they have any awareness or strangeness or?
People report. I mean, when I do a lot of groups, and when I do the groups, I'm doing a lot of readings and short ones. It's
Yeah.
different than being with a client, on a Zoom call or something like that. So I often hear the reports from them about what they're experiencing. Sometimes the energy that the guides I work with show up with come in very specific ways, and people can have their own experiences. And I'm far more interested in people having their own experiences of this stuff than deferring to whatever mine is.
Mm.
But have I gone back to somebody and said, "What was it like during the reading?" No, I don't think I have, unless they want to have another session and tell me what they felt. And occasionally I'll get stuff like that. And often it's just, it didn't make any sense what you were saying, and now it does.
Uh,
Like that dog you said I was going to adopt, it's in my lap now. Just as things like that happen. But that's not a big deal.
hmm. Speaking of, is your dog around? Because I always see.
I've got two of them. I've got
Okay.
Lily, and my mom died, so I have her dog now.
Oh,
My dog is under the desk, my mom's dog. Lily, I don't know where she is. She may be outside. It's pretty today.
it does look nice. It sure looks nice. I'm just used to seeing you with one of the dogs on your lap. So,
Uh,
yeah, which is lovely. Um, so yeah, this is great. Before getting into the channel stuff, I want to ask one more question about just like pre-life, which is you had this whole career both at NYU and at Goddard, right? So what was it like navigating those two worlds where you're developing these psychic abilities and you're having these workshops and you're also completely professional, putting on and publishing plays, teaching? How did that sort of function for you?
it's much less graceful than you just described it. You know, I I started off adjuncting at NYU, and then I got a real job there eventually. But I was just so grateful to be able to buy dinner in those
Mhm.
days, And Goddard, which is an old hippie school, when they found out that I did this stuff, they said, "Well, why aren't you doing it here?" And I said, "Are you crazy?" And they said, "No, this is Goddard. You don't leave any parts of yourself behind." So suddenly I had permission to start integrating this part of myself into my academic life, probably for better and for worse, but I was learning. When I began teaching at NYU when I was like 27,
Okay.
and I was excited and opening up spiritually. And I used to teach the students how to see auras on a low teaching day. We had extra time. And then I started showing up on my evaluations. I learned about Aristotle, and now I can read an aura. And I thought, oh God, I got to stop this. So I did. And I just did my thing. And it wasn't until the book started coming out, which was in 2010, that I really couldn't hide anymore. And finally what happened was, I think that there was enough, at least at NYU, there was enough video of me channeling online that the students would show up and they'd go, "Look at this guy," and none of it was mean.
Mm.
My favorite was when I had to tell the kids that a TV crew wanted to film me at NYU. And I had to get permission from my chair, who I didn't think knew, and he didn't seem to care. He just said, "Good, go for it," And I was like, well, "This is interesting." I had to go tell a class of NYU freshmen. I said, "I don't know if you know about this about me," and they said, "Oh yeah, we know."
Yeah.
They knew. They were just being really sweet and really polite, and they all dressed up the day the camera crew came, and they
Mhm.
pretended to be listening. They pretended to be interested when I gave them a lecture that they'd heard like 2 months before in front of the crew. So people don't care as much as you think. At least when you're in the arts, it's not that big a deal anymore. But when I started off, I had a website without my name on it
Mhm.
or without my photograph. I didn't want people to find me, and I had to make a choice. I think when the books started coming, to publish them with my name, even though I'm not the author, and I agreed to do that, and that wasn't a bad move to do.
Oh, certainly not. Interesting. So that brings us here. How did the first book start? So I am the word. Where does that come from? What's the gestation for going from doing these things in workshops to we're going to write a very thick book?
Well, when I was 48, which was must have been 2009, 2008, something like that, I quit smoking. I had been a 4-pack a day guy for most of my adult life. I loved it, and but the guides one day said, "We want to keep working with you, but until you attend to this, we can't." And I quit,
Oh.
immediately, and I quit. And when I did, my work changed enormously. The channel work changed completely, that's when they began to lecture. I
Mm.
was hearing stuff. Most of the work for me was about the energy that would come through when they were channeling, which was palpable, and they were working with energetic attunements, and it was a big energetic event. But I wasn't that interested in what they were saying, because I thought, well, you can't fake the energy. The energy we can all feel, but who knows what this is that I'm saying? I'm just saying what I'm hearing. But once I began to take the dictation, a friend of mine found out that I wasn't recording and transcribing, so I started to.
Mm.
And then I got hired and fired from a writing gig, and I went to bed. And Victoria Nelson, who was a colleague of mine at Goddard, I think I've been in bed for 2 days already, and she called me up and said, "Paul, this might be a very good time for you to write that memoir about how you became clairaudient."
Mm.
And I said, "Well, I'm never going to write again," and I meant it. And then the guides piped in and said, "Well, we have a book to write, and if you take 2 weeks, we'll do it."
Mm.
And at that moment, my ego had just been quashed. I had extra time that I wasn't planning on using. I think it was winter break or something at NYU. And I agreed. And 2 days later, we met on the phone, and the guides dictated this book called I Am the Word. And it took like 2 weeks and 2 days, because I took 2 days off to go back to NYU to teach. So I took 2 days off from the 2 weeks. It's a little over 2 weeks. And they said, "This is the first." They said there's a number of things. They said, "This is the first book in a trilogy." They said it's going to be published. It's the first publisher who reads it, and don't haggle. And and it's everything that pretty much happened
Yeah.
with that. But that it wasn't planned. I didn't really know. I just showed up. I put a CD recorder on the arm of the chair. I had my dog in my lap. I had 2 iced coffees on the floor, and I just step back, and I allow what's always happened is the same thing. I hear one phrase repeated, and I give voice to that one phrase, and the rest of everything just tumbles out on top of it until the guides say, "Stop now, please," which means that's the end of the lecture. That's the end of the dictation.
Mm.
It took me longer to type the thing up than it did to dictate it. And it wasn't until it was all typed up that I saw that it really was a book,
Yeah.
because I didn't know if it would hold together at all.
And it really does. So you brought up the energy there, and I wanted to follow up on this because one of the things that I love about your works are, and the guides speak to this, that there's the level of information, the words, and
Mhm.
then that's kind of like a sheath for this energy transmission,
Yeah.
right? And you know, people who listen to this and are scholars of mystical literature, like are used to those sorts of
Really.
transmissions in a way, but you're work so hard for them, right? Because you're learning primary languages and you're learning complex philosophy. This is so straightforward, but it still has all of that in this really, really palpable way. So you feel those energies as they're coming through as well? or not actually.
I'm in it when it's
Yeah.
happening. So at times when they're doing an attunement, I still feel it. When I do them live in live streams or public workshops, I can feel the energy in the attunements as they're delivered. But when they're channeling, basically, it's not like I'm them. I'm receded. I feel the energy shifting. But what they've said is that the books are operating on two levels, the words on the page and then the energy that informs them. That the real book is the energetic transmission, and the language gives it context. I'm so busy when I'm channeling trying to keep up with the next phrase that I'm so singular when I'm working, because I whisper and I repeat, I'm bang, 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 bang. It's like 1,000 fortune cookies, one after the next in order. And I'm just trying to keep, sometimes so fast, the transcriptionists have to slow down the recording to be able to work with it. But, when the very first book came out and nobody knew who I was, and the guide said, this is a book that will be experienced more so than read. And people started reviewing the books. And it was really interesting. People said, I'm reading this book and I'm seeing auras. I'm reading this book and I'm feeling energies, and people started having their own experience with this stuff, which is what the guides had intended. So, that's how it's been really since they've begun. And it's what I like about the work. They're claiming us in some kind of an agreement to what they know to be true in a way that we can have our own experience with. I'm not a spiritual teacher. I'm not a guru. I have no desire to be either of those things. I've gotten better at trying to interpret the teachings when people ask Paul questions. Over the years, I've gotten better at that. But yeah, that's how the books work. I mean, they are transmissions. So I didn't know that there's a legacy of this in mystical literature, but then I don't know this stuff.
Yeah, but just to repeat, it's just how direct it is really, really interesting and special. There's no sort of backflip hermeneutics that you have to get to it. It just sort of transmits, which is wonderful. So I guess now that we've talked about them over several minutes, who do you understand the guides to be? Who are the guides?
Well, the only reason they're called the guides is because my ex many years ago, when he found out I could do this, used to say, ask the guides this, ask the guides that. That's why they're called the guides. It was easy. The name that they've claimed when they say, if you wish to call us something, you may call us Melchizedek, which is an old name in a priesthood. Sometimes they call themselves the true self, which is another way that they use the term Christ. They say that Christ is the aspect of the creator that can be realized in form. Sometimes they call it the monad or the true self. I'm uncomfortable with the names only because this stuff tends to be very heavily laden with history, and also in the New Age, and I'm not a good New Ager, truthfully. I hear some, back when I was just opening up, you'd hear things like, there's an Archangel Michael channeling on the Upper West Side, but you better go to Gowanus in Brooklyn and hear Gabriel. That's the hot one. And it was like, this is kind of ridiculous, So I used to think, it's really just the energy. It's the energy and the truth of the teaching that matters. Anybody can call themselves anything. The one that I've seen, that I've seen on a few occasions, that's come through in a very visual way, seems to resemble that archetype. It's an interesting, presentation, to say the least. And I recognize him in a profound way when I see him. It's like, oh, here it is. This is it. But that's the name, for better or for worse.
And so is the one you've seen from time to time, do you think or does it click for you as the same one you saw when you were 5?
I think so. And that's my feeling now when I go back to that. And I was just asking somebody else, and I was asking another psychic about this. I said, what do you get on this one? Because I'm trying to unpack some of this for myself now that I'm I'm trying to do a little bit of my own writing about my life. And I think sometimes that if I was prepped for something, that was it. I mean, I was a weird kid, granted, but I also was firmly convinced that thoughts were things when I was a child. And and so much so that the thoughts were frightening to me.
Mm.
It was really, and it was, I mean, maybe now you'd say it was OCD or rumination, but it was not easy stuff that I showed up with. And I sometimes wonder if I wasn't being told, hang in there, there's work to be done, but I don't know. Maybe one day.
The great revelation at some point, just sort of identification. So I want to talk a little bit about, or unpack with you, what the guides teach, right? And it's certainly evolved over time, but it seems to me the most basic, fundamental idea there is this humanist two, right? There's this conscious self, and then there's the Christ self, or the conscious self, or something like that. Yeah. So, anyways, yeah. So, what would you say their fundamental message is? Sorry to ask a big question.
I'll try. I mean,
Yeah.
I think sometimes it's the same, really. I think they may have been unpacking the same message since the first book in an escalation of understanding and awareness. They seem to be speaking to the realization, which is the knowing and the embodiment of what they call the divine self or the God within. And, when I was in my early 30s, and I always have to say I'm 99% sure I heard this in channel because I was just really opening and I didn't understand this, and I wrote it down because I was struggling at the time. And I heard freedom will come when the throne relinquishes its king. And I thought, what does that mean? But that's the essence of the teaching when I look back at it, which is who sits in the throne, who's running the show. And they say that the personality self, or the idea of who we are, is completely indoctrinated through a false lens of separation. So our memory individually and collectively is actually shadowed by a belief that we're separate from one another and from source. And we've accrued all of this evidence to that. But they say that the denial of the divine is the only real problem humanity faces. And that's not a religious thing. It's an awareness of the God within. So the teachings from I Am the Word have always been about the manifestation of the divine self as can be known in form. And, they don't talk about, I don't know. I mean, I think it's probably, well, let me put it this way. Jeff Kripal said, because we taught together once at Esalen, which was fun because the guides would debate him at times. I don't know if he liked it. They were
Oh my
fun.
gosh, that's wonderful. Is there video of this? I would love to watch
There
this.
might well be from that time.
Yeah.
I remember Jeff might know because he was running the thing.
Yeah.
But on the nature of evil and things like that, I mean, the guys. And the only other person they've ever done this with is Charles Eisenstein, who's a philosopher. The guides have debated with Charles too. It's just funny, they like it. They seem to enjoy it when they go there. So Jeff used to say that the teaching was Gnostic. He said, this is a Gnostic teaching. Victoria Nelson, who was actually on the phone with me for the first 2 or 3 books, she was the active listener. I was recording, she was taking her own notes. And she said it was not a Gnostic teaching. It was, what's the other one? Hermetic. She said it's a Hermetic teaching because they're dealing with form in the body and manifestation. And they are increasingly so in their books. They work with these energetic claims. I know who I am in truth. I know what I am in truth. I know how I serve in truth. And they say these things are claimed by the divine within, not the personality self. And they said once to a student early on who thought he had the teaching, I get this, we become the Christ. And they jumped in and they said, no, you don't become the Christ becomes you, which is a very different paradigm of realization, of allowing the divine essence to express itself through you. And they say that's how one serves, is to be most fully expressed as what they call the true self. And that doesn't come at the cost of the personality. It comes as the personality self is acclimated to the higher. It's not about ridding ourselves of our humanity. It's about re-knowing the humanity as part of God as well.
Mhm. In that debate, I side with Vicky, for what it's
Okay,
worth.
really, that's interesting.
Yeah, and especially since I'm Jeff's student, but because I'm assuming what Vicky is pointing out is there's not like this sharp dualism in anything that's coming from the guides. All right. And embodiment is on no level, it doesn't seem bad in any of those teachings, right? So yeah, although the Christ itself does definitely resonate with certain of the ancient texts for sure.
Mhm.
Speaking of, so you have this sort of outsider's experience of religion
Mhm.
growing up and Jewish father. What was it like when you started talking about the Christ self in the channeled literature, or when it
Uncomfortable.
started to come out of you? Yeah.
I was uncomfortable a bit, but you know, I mean, I had my encounter with some of the new thought teachers,
Mhm.
you know, and they would use that term, but I think that they were reclaiming it. And the
Mhm.
guides have said, you know, they're reclaiming language that's been abused or utilized wrongly, you know, when they use some of this stuff. There was somebody who wrote me after the first or second book came out and said, you have to tell your guys to stop using that word Christ. It's offensive to many people, and you have to, you know. And then and somebody else wanted all of the books rewritten in gender neutral language. And the answer was always, you know, I don't write these books.
Um,
It's not mine to fix. It's not mine to edit. I mean, there's maybe 3 words edited in any of the book, any of the most recent books. In the earlier, maybe a little more, but only because I stumbled more, I think, you
mm,
know, and that's usually an S that's been added to a word that didn't need to be pluralized, you know. So it's the books are clean transcriptions. So I don't know.
yeah. So speaking of your role in this, one of the things that makes you both really captivating to watch and to read is if you're reading it on the page, in some sense, you're like a character, right? In the sense that they're like, so Paul right now is seeing a well,
Yeah.
right? And they're describing your response to the well. And or they might go, oh, Paul is very uncomfortable with what we're talking about right now.
Mhm.
Right. So uh, there's a lot of things that you could talk about in relation to that, but I'm curious why they decided to keep all that in, right? Because so
Well,
much Chandler's literature is direct. This is much more personal in a way.
in some ways, I think I'm like the student in the first row
Mm,
that they can't avoid, and I'm being used. It's my vocabulary. At times, I think their vocabulary is better than mine because we have to look up words once in a while to see if they've been used properly. In the very first book, I didn't do much of that. I am the word. And in the very first section of the first book, there's an odd little passage which says something like, "This is not a book that's been written before. This is not a Course in
yeah.
Miracles." And people said, "What do you guys talk about the Course in Miracles for?" The only reason that's in the book is they said, "This is not a book that's been written before. This is not a Course in Miracles." And I'm thinking in the background, "Oh yeah, what about a Course in Miracles?" And they answered the question in the
Mm,
text. And what they learn to do is if I intrude, they will address the intrusion.
mm,
Sometimes they'll just dispense with it. Paul has a question, we will not take it now. For the most part, they do. And they unpack it to the extent that I can continue to work comfortably. I think it was in one book, it might have been the Book of Mastery. They started off one section going, you know, something like, you know, nothing is real. And I went, okay, I understand that. People talk about that stuff. And then the next section, they said, and now today we'll talk about how everything is real. And I panicked because I thought that they were contradicting their own teaching, which I don't think they'd ever done. And I thought, there goes the whole book. It's just done. And it didn't. But it was Jeff who actually explained to me at the time, oh, yeah, that's Meister Eckhart was talking about this. And I go, okay, that's as long as there's some kind of context for some of this stuff. So the intrusions are mine. I'm told by people who like the books that it's helpful for them. I'm often asking their questions.
mm.
But nothing's edited. That's really the only thing that was edited in one of the books was when the UPS guy kept buzzing my buzzer when I was trying to channel and I was cursing. And the guy had said, "We will dispense with this today. We'll do it again tomorrow." And we lost a little section, which was really good. But I was just too upset by the noise to be able to go back in and step out of the way enough to bring them through.
And in terms of that dynamic as well, when you're channeling them, you do the whisper and then you elocute, right? You make it much louder. Is that something that you're aware of what your body is doing and your voice as you're doing it? Because I know you're a conscious channel. But
Yes and no, both are true. In some ways, what I'm just doing is raising the volume on what I just heard on the repeat. When I started doing this initially, and this is 30 years ago, I used to feel like somebody was pressing their lips against my forehead and impressing the words in, and then I would form the words with my lips. And the whispering was the initial delivery, and I was whispering, and then I'd have to repeat what I heard. Nowadays, I occasionally work without the repetition. The challenge for me is when I do that, I don't remember anything that I've said. I mean, it actually just becomes reduced to sound. It's almost like at a certain point, I'm just making noises, and I don't know if there have been words attached. And I find that a little out of control myself. This way, I get to interrogate the teachings myself a little bit. And maybe I'm just still being developed. I mean, what they've said to me at times is their energy is so vast that this is how it can be parsed through me. It's not like when I'm reading you or I'm reading somebody else, and it's just like a voice in the living room. That's not how this is experienced. It's a very, very different thing, and it comes fast, and it's very immediate, and it's very direct. And my job is to keep up with it. And if I start to presuppose where they're going to go with a sentence, which has been known to happen, like when I want to finish the sentence the way I think it's supposed to be thought, 'twas the night before Christmas, and all through you just want to fill in the blank. They've learned to switch the language up on me so that I have to stay present. So it was the night before Christmas and all through the pantry,
back in.
back on target.
There you go. No, I actually think it makes it really captivating in a way. I know you're repeating the same thing, but it makes it feel dialogical, right? There's this back and forth, and there's this rhythm to it. Really appreciate when you're watching other channels and it's just that direct, right? It's different, but it's good. So the guides, I believe they've said before that they weren't human, right? They didn't have like a past human life and get here. But for us, right, they speak a lot about reincarnation. Is the long-term goal of this reincarnation and learning to become ascended masters and guides like them, or is there something else in view?
They say some of us have been informed, some of us have not. So they're playing both sides. Some of them have had bodies, some of them have not, is what I've understood of the collective that they come through with. They don't talk about becoming like, this is what they've said about my favorite thing they ever said about who they are. They say, we are who you are. We are who you become when you know who you are. That's what they describe themselves as. But they don't talk, I mean, they do talk about karma, and they do talk about ongoing learning, but it's not the focus of their teaching, and, my slight memories that I have of other stuff are inclusive of some of this kinds of work, but I don't spend my time dining out there either.
And so I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this. So there's a certain urgency to their teaching. So why did they say now? What's important about now as the time for this to come across?
Well, they've said this since the very first book, and they said humanity is at a time of reckoning, and a reckoning is a facing of oneself and all of one's creations. and that everything that's been created in fear needs to be reknown in a higher way. I also think, and they've said as much, that we have the means to blow ourselves to kingdom come now, if we choose to. And they say that the idea that we create bombs to keep ourselves safe is ridiculous, because eventually they go off. That's the purpose of the bomb. And I hear we're going to make it. That's what they've said. And they've said that consistently for the last number of years. But I think that this is the time. And, they've been pretty on it when you look at the books and when the books were delivered and then what was sort of happening in the world around that time or shortly after that time. It's really interesting to see that they've been on target with this stuff. I mean, they said, and it was the Book of Truth, which was delivered before a couple of presidential elections ago when things went a certain way. And they said, what's about to happen is that everything that's been buried is coming to the surface. And that means 5 years ago and 5,000 years ago. And things don't get brought to the surface because they need to be blamed, but they need to be seen, because nothing is transformed until it's first seen. You can't bring the light to something that you're seeking to hide in darkness. So we were in a process of excavation. They said, imagine that your backyard is now an archaeological dig, and this is what life is going to be like for all of you. And right before that election, which was the Trump-Clinton election, 3 days before, I was channeling in somewhere in the Midwest, and they delivered a lecture. It's actually, that one's up online. They called it Great Change, or we called it Great Change because we had to give it a title. And it said, your idea of choice is I'm going to have the milk or the cream in my coffee, and what's about to happen is that the table that carried the milk and the cream is about to get toppled over. That's what you're in for now. And that was what we had, really, when you look at it.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's another thing that it's really I appreciate about these guides is they have a sense of humor from time to time. Right?
Sometimes,
Yeah, occasionally it comes out. They're not full on earnest all the time. So you've spoken a number of times now about how you're the student in the front row, right? You're a student of these teachings, not the guru, for sure. So how has it changed you then, being the student, right? Over, I guess you started channeling these works in 2009. So how have you evolved as Paul Selig?
well, I'm living a completely different life than I used to. I don't walk around feeling that I've ascended. There's a quote attributed to Helen Schuckman, who channeled A Course in Miracles, where she says, I don't believe it, but I know it's true, which I like a lot because I understand that feeling. I am not the best student of their work, but I think I'm a good one. And I'm good in the ways that I understand that I can work with the teachings in immediate ways, which is like not making choices based in fear. They say the action of fear is to claim more fear. They say you can't be the light and hold another in darkness. I'm aware of when I do those things and how they harm me. And I'm aware that how I hold anything in my awareness contributes to the thing in the form that I claim it in, this terrible thing, that wonderful thing, and how, as the guides say, we're collectively creating a reality through our belief in what should be there and what we've been told to expect, and how that can be altered. So I'm a very different life now. I'm much more peaceful, but it's not at 100%. I don't know that I would have gotten into this stuff had I been so happy initially. It was not that I was seeking an escape from something, I was seeking a way to manage it. That's what life was like. So, I left my academic life maybe 9 years ago now or something, and I walked away from 2 full-time appointments, at an age when people are thinking about retiring, and are getting ready to think about it. And I do this work now. It's what I do. I accept that it's what I do. I feel that my job in this work is to show up for it. That's my job. I show up, and often when I don't want to, when I show up. And I understand that I may never understand it, or I may not be the person who realizes it fully. There was a time, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, and I was really down, and I was working with this woman from Agape Church, Amy Perry. She's a lovely prayer minister type, and she said, "I'm going to ask your guides what's up with you." And it's because I can't always hear for myself, but if somebody's asking the question, I can step out enough to render the answer clearly and without it being what I want to hear. And the guide said, Paul's job is to hold the door open for others. And we both went, oh, that sucks. That's not that's awful. What terrible guides I must have. And maybe a year later, they were channeling at the Esalen Institute, and they said, the door is open and everybody gets to come now. Come, come, come. And that's when they introduced this concept of the upper room, which is what they teach now, which they call, it's basically Christ consciousness, but it's a level of vibration that they say is available. And they said, and Paul, you get to come too now, which was really quite something. And since then, my life is completely different. I live on Maui now. I have community, which is loving and kind. And I'm surprised some days because, I didn't think this would end up being me. And I never thought this is what I would end up doing with my life. Maybe at a certain point, but it was not on my plan for myself. I didn't even necessarily believe in channeling, early on. And I think some of what passes for channeling isn't. That's out there in the world. I'm a little bit of a picky about that. I think true channeling is stenography. It's not about zeitgeist. It's not about the trend of the moment. It's not about who killed Princess Di. It's not the stuff that people like to attach to because it's kind of sexy and fun. And I think the truth of the channeling always has to be the channeling itself and how it changes people or works with people or supports people in their own lives. That's it.
Yeah, that's really well put. This is just a personal question, but when you were making the move from New York to Hawaii, did you consult with the guides at all? Did they say, no, that would be great? Or was that just
I
Paul
didn't plan on
decision?
coming here at all. I didn't plan this at all. This was the biggest gift ever. I was channeling in Costa Rica, and I had done some live stream where the guides had said, there's a big event coming to the world, and it's going to hit New York very, very hard. And I said, I don't want to be in New York. I think I said this online, and there's got to be a tape of it someplace. I said, please just let me be someplace pretty, not in New York and someplace pretty when it happens. And I was in Costa Rica channeling for a week when New York shut down during COVID. It shut down like 4 days after I was there. I couldn't go home. And I had a friend who was on Maui, and I didn't know what else to do. I didn't know where to go. And he said, come to Maui. And I had been to Hawaii, the state, once in my life on a really terrible blind date with a dolphin instructor, dolphin communicator. I came all the way. Yeah. We didn't do very well. I said, I'm never going back to Hawaii again as long as I live. And I ended up on Maui. And I have to say, I never went home, really. I mean, the guides used to say in workshops sometimes, people used to say, well, we've had this great high experience, but what do we do when we get home? And the guides say, who says you have to go home? You're choosing that. You always think you're supposed to do things. Once they told a whole group of women, you can all leave your husbands, they screamed. And then they laughed because they weren't telling them to leave. They were saying, you can if you want to. And I never went home. It's happened to me. My dog was left in New York. My stuff was in New York. I had an apartment I never got to spend a night into that I had just rented. I was here through all that, and then I stayed. And it's a funny thing, I ended up being sort of welcomed through a lot of serendipitous, strange things, the community, the satsang that built up around Ram Dass.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a very weird story, but so there's some other hand in this whole thing, including, floating off at Esalen, during a bodywork session and seeing a giant monkey staring down at me and saying to the guy, well, I'm seeing a giant monkey staring down. And he goes, yeah, I was chanting to Hanuman before I came here. So now I'm with the Hanuman crowd here on on a beautiful island and feel myself very, very, very fortunate.
That is wonderful. That was really, really great. The Also, blind date dolphin instructor on Maui is like a really great Mad Lib. Like it just sort of fills that in.
Pretty, yeah.
It was pretty sharp. But yeah, I mean, we're all very happy that you've landed someplace like this. And just to close out, where it sounds like what's on your front burner right now is this memoir.
That's what I'm doing now for the next few months. We'll see. It's the first writing of my own that I've done in 12 years, easy, and I'm having to face those demons of, oh my God, can I still do this? But that's what I'm doing now. But I still channel online every week,
Yeah.
And I do a live stream intensive once a month, and I'm traveling again. So I'll be this spring, I do something here on Maui, a big event, and then some stuff in Europe and stuff around the country. I like to travel with this still.
Wonderful. All right. Well, Paul Selig, thank you so much for coming on Pop Apocalypse. It's been a pleasure. Yeah, and enjoy the beautiful weather out there in Maui while those of us in the Northeast are slipping around on ice and trying not to shiver too much.
Well, thank you for having me. It was fun.
Thank you very much.